Multimedia and Web Design. Today we're gonna talk about CSS. But before we dive in, let us put down some questions to lead us through our discussions. First of all, we're going to talk about the what CSS is, and then we move to the why they introduced CSS to us as developers, and then we move to the how to specify some properties in the CSS file, right? And then when we are done, preferably we look at some challenged properties in CSS, right? Okay, so first of all, CSS stands for Cascading Stylesheet, right? So as the name delineates, it is a style sheet. We use it in styling our HTML page, right? We all know the HTML page or the HTML file, HTML elements, their tags, and then a whole lot are used to just put documents or put elements on the page. We can't use HTML to style the elements or position the elements as we want on our web page or in our browser, right? So CSS describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on screen, paper, or other media screens. CSS saves us a lot of work. That is why they introduce CSS to us as developers, because taking this scenario as developing a web page and then using HTML to style it. Sometimes we use the table model to style it and a whole lot. It gives a whole lot of work, and then to be frank, they don't look nice when we use HTML to just style our page on it. So that is why they introduced CSS to us. And then to be frank too, CSS is kind of simple to use. They have some simple syntax and then simple tasks to do to beautify your HTML or beautify your page. But CSS contains a whole lot of things as we move along with this video. Alright, so how do we inscribe CSS in our HTML elements or in our HTML page? The syntax for CSS is the selector, and then after the selector we come to a blog, and then the blog is being described or is being put on the CSS file with a curly brackets or a curly braces, and then within the curly braces we have a property. We come with a colon and then a value of that particular property, and then we can specify as many as we want, as many properties as we want for a particular element of the HTML. So like in the curly braces or the curly brackets, we use the semicolon to differentiate other properties and their values from the others. So like, let's say for example, we have our H1 selector or H1 elements. We're gonna talk about selectors later, right? So like, let's say H1, and then within the curly braces we have the font of the H1 to be font family to be, let's say, sans serif. We use the semicolon to differentiate the sans serif. That is the font family for, let's say, a font size being 12 pixels, right? So we can put in a whole lot of CSS properties as we want, but we make sure they are all in the scope of the selector, right? Yeah, so I think that is it about the syntax of the CSS. Now we have selectors. CSS selector selects the HTML elements that we want to style. As simple as that. In the HTML file, we have a whole lot of elements on it. We have the body elements, we have the H1 elements, the div elements, a whole lot of elements. So when we want to style a particular element, how do we do it? We need to select it. We need to reference it from the HTML, right? So selector simply means trying to reference an element within the HTML page to style it the way we want, or the way we want it to look on the browser or in the browser, right? Yeah. So like we have some types, or we have like 5 types of selectors. We have the simple selectors. We select elements based on their names or based on the classes or ID. So when we want to select an element based on a class, we know in the HTML file we put these classes in the opening tags of the HTML elements, right? So like these are like attributes. So we have, let's say in a div element, and in the opening tag of the div element we have, let's say, a class, and then the class of, let's say, container, right? The class comes, equals sign comes, and then within that particular opening tag we specify the name of the class. Now when we want to reference that particular element in our style sheet, we just have to, since it's a class, we just have to start with a dots or a period, right? So after the dots we bring the name, exact name. We can't, let's say, name our element a container, a class of container, and then within our CSS file we use a different name, or let's say even the characters, we can use uppercase in this one and then use lowercase in that one. It doesn't work that way, right? Yeah, so we reference classes by bringing a period first and then the class name second, and then when we are done we bring our curly braces, and then we specify whatever properties we want to use in styling that elements, right? And then when we come to the ID selector too, we bring the hash, right? So like in our CSS file we write the hash. Right after the hash we bring the name of the particular element, that is the ID. Now IDs are very unique to HTML elements, right? So like we can't use one unique or one particular ID for different elements on the HTML page. So like referencing that from the HTML page, we just have to bring the hash and then the name of the ID to select that particular element that we want. So we have selected that element by the ID, right? And then we can also select the elements based on the tags name. So let's say we want to let's say on our element or on our HTML page we have the body. Right after the body we have an H1 element, right, which is, let's say, the heading of our website. We can select that particular element, the H1 element, with just the name H1. We bring our curly braces, and then whatever style we want to, or whatever properties we want to use in styling our HTML element in the H1 element in the HTML, we specify them in the curly braces, and then we separate that. Don't forget, we separate that with a semicolon, right? Yeah, we have combinator selectors too. We have pseudo class selectors, pseudo element selectors, attribute selectors, and a whole lot. When time permits, we're going to talk about these all. How to add CSS in our HTML file. Basically, we have three types of inserting our HTML or our style sheets in our HTML elements, right? So we have the external CSS, we have the internal CSS, and we have the inline CSS. Let me talk about the inline CSS first. The inline CSS simply means, putting the style attributes in the tags or in the opening tags of that particular element, right? So let's say the div element. Right in the opening tags of the div element, we specify our style. We use the style attribute in doing the or in specify the inline style CSS, right? So like we do style equals, we bring our quotation marks, and then within the quotation marks we specify whatever properties we want to give to that particular element in it. So let's say our div element, we specify the style attribute, and then within the style attribute, let's say we put the background color of red. We use our semicolon. Don't forget to use our semicolon to separate that, and then we bring our font size, our font style, our margin, our padding, a whole lot. We can include or we can inscribe all these properties into that particular element with this inline style of inscribing CSS. But we cannot testify that this is a stressful work. This is going to be a stress, and it's going to mess up our page. If we want to do or debug our page, sometimes it would be very, very tedious to do that. And sometimes you can't even identify the particular elements you want to debug or something, because your page would be messed up. Yeah, so that is the inline. And then we have the internal CSS, or internal way of adding CSS to our HTML file. Now with this style of, with this style of CSS, it is specified in the head of the HTML file. You know, we have our doc type, or sorry, in the HTML file we have our doc type, we have our head, or sorry, our HTML, and then within the HTML we have our head and then the body. Now within the head tag, or within the head elements of the HTML, that is where we can put this internal CSS at. So that there too we do our style tag. We have this tag called style tag. So within the style tag too, we can specify whatever whatever properties we want to use in styling our HTML page. So that is the internal way of adding CSS to our HTML file. And then lastly, we have the external way of adding CSS, and I think this is the preferred way of inscribing CSS in your work. Okay, so this way we have a particular file for CSS, and then it has an extension of CSS too. So whatever name you're gonna give it, that name dot the CSS above. So like, let's say in your directory, or in your working directory, you have your index.html file. You can name your particular, or your CSS file as, let's say, style.css, index.css. All that matters is your extension should be .css. Now, how are we going to link this particular file into our HTML file? It's just simple. Within the head of the HTML file, you'd have to specify a link, right? So we have this tag, or this element called the link element, or the link tag. So within the link tag, we have some attributes. We have the rel attributes, and then the href attribute. The rel attribute simply stands for the relationship, right? So the relationship is the relationship between that particular link in the HTML file and the link you want to reference. So the href is the reference, or is the reference, or the path to that particular file we are inscribing in our HTML, right? So when the HTML file is in the same working directory as the index, or sorry, the HTML file, we just write the name dot the CSS extension, right? So let's say a style sheet. Only when it is in the same working directory as the HTML file, you just specify the name, let's say style.css, and then you are good to go. But if you would have to, let's say, put your CSS file in another folder, you would have to specify the path correctly, right? You have to specify the path correctly to that particular file. So let's say my CSS is in another folder called, let's say, my style folder. Within the href attribute of the link elements, I would have to specify this path correctly to my CSS file. So I have my relationship shortly as the rel. I quote it style sheet because the relationship between the CSS file and then this HTML file is a style sheet, right? The CSS is a style sheet to the HTML file. And then I come to the href. Let's say I have this external file, or sorry, I have this folder called my style folder. I'd specify it in quotes, my style folder / the name of my CSS file. Let's say style.css. Yeah, so this is how you can link your external CSS file to your HTML file, right? So like, yeah, I think that is it or that's basically how we can go about CSS. And then here we start, or we look at some elements of the CSS, right, of the cascading style sheets. Yeah, but before that, I'd like to point on this particular selection, or this particular selector. You have this asterisk selector. It selects all the elements, or all the elements on the HTML file. All right. So when you use this asterisk sign, you open your curly brackets, and then you specify whatever attribute, or sorry, whatever properties you're going to specify in the curly bracket. It is going to apply to all the elements in the HTML file, right? Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about the color property. The color property, I think it is just something simple, right? Let's say you have an H1 element or H1 tag, and then you want this particular H1 tag to be of a color of red. Within the style sheet, you have to specify it, right? So specifying it, use the color property, right? So the color, and then your column comes the value. Let's say you want it as red, you want it as blue, you can specify it. You can use the name of the color. You can also use the RGB, which stands for the red, green, and then blue color code. You can also use the hexadecimal code color coding, right? The hexadecimal color coding is in the format of red. I mean the hash, and then RR, GG, and then BB. The RR stands for the red, the GG stands for the green, and then the BB stands for the blue. So like it starts from hexadecimal. So it starts from 0 to 9, and then from A to F, right? You can use it like however you want it, right? You can just mix it up, and then you are going to get random colors. It's a very nice thing. You can use the RGB, which stands for the red, green, blue, and then the alpha. The alpha simply means the opacity of the color. So like when you specify the color, you can, between 0 and 1, you can bring the opacity to 0.3, which is like 30% opacity of the particular color, right? And then we have the background color too. So like as the name specifies, background color. Let's say you want a particular background for a particular element in your HTML file or on the web page. You just have to specify the property name, background color, right? And then you put the value in whatever color you want to give it. Yeah. The text color is the same as the color. Sometimes it's confusing. When you want to color the text, you just have to specify the property color. But when you want to color the background, that is when you need to be specific, the background color. But when it's a text, you just put the color. That is it, and then you go away. Yeah. So let's talk about background. We've talked about the background color already. We can talk about background image. So the background image, as the name delineates, simply means putting an image on your background, right? You can use this property to put whatever image, perhaps any image that you want, but put that image as a background in your web page or on your web page. You'd have to do that with a URL value. So like the URL value, and then within a bracket you put in the link or the path to that particular image you want to use as the background. If the image is in the same directory as your files, your CSS file or your HTML file, you just have to specify the name or put the name of the image dots, whatever extension you've given it, or whatever extension you downloaded with, right? When the images are also in a folder, you'd have to do same as you did for the link elements when we are specifying the CSS, right? So let's say they are in a folder named images. You would have to put in the images folder / the name of that particular image you would want to use as your background image. Now we have a whole lot of properties, for the background. The background is a whole, or it's a shorthand property, but within that background we have background images, as I mentioned earlier, background repeat, background attachment, background position, and the whole lot. The background repeat simply refers to the repetition of images. Sometimes, or mostly, normally when you put image as the background, it repeats itself to fill the particular viewport of your device, right? So when you don't want it that way, you just have to specify the background repeat to no repeat, or how you want it to repeat. Sometimes you would want it to repeat in the horizontal way or horizontal axis. You would just have to, you know, specify the repeat X if it's in the column wise, or it's in the Y axis. You'd have to repeat, just have to present it with a repeat of Y, right? Yeah. So you have a whole value for this background repeat too with regards to background images. And then the background attachments, I mean, this this refers to, you know, put your image. When you put, let's say you put a background image as your background, right? You can attach this background, like you can use this background attachment as a fixed position for that particular background image. So let's say you don't want your background image to move with the whole document when we are scrolling through. You can use this background attachment property to help you with that. And then we have the background position as well, how you want to position your background. All right, so this helps a lot. Shall we move to the borders of the CSS 2? So yeah, CSS borders, right? A whole lot of style, or a whole lot of properties with regards to the CSS borders, right? You have the border style one. The border style simply refers to how we want our borders to, either in a dot-wise way, in a dashed way, solid, double, groove. I mean, a whole lot, right? So we can, you know, as the name delineates, border. When you want to have something around a particular element, we would have to, you know, select the element in the CSS, bring this property named border. But first of all, the border is a generalized property, right? But we can specify it, or we can break it down into simpler properties, with which the border style forms one of those simpler properties, right? So we can specify the border style too as as we want. If we want the border to be dots, we can do that. If we want it to be dash, we can do that. Solid, whatever we want it to be, we can, you know, do that. Now, as many properties of the border, we have the border width as well. So the border width simply means the thickness of our border around our element, right? So we can use numbers for it, and then we can use measurements with pixels, with centimeters, and a whole lot. So like with that border width, we can, let's say, specify it with 5 pixels or something, 10 pixels. How thick you want it, you just have to, you know, specify it. Sometimes we can use these keywords to specify them. Let's say our border width, we use thick, thin, and then medium, right? That is when we would want to be general sometimes. But when you want to be specific, you want, like, you know, the particular measurement you have to give your border, you just go straight ahead and then specify the measurements for it, right? And then as part of it too, we have the border color. CSS border color, as the name suggests, the border color, what color or the particular color you want your border to be. You just have to specify the property border color, and you give that particular color to it. Now you can use the hexadecimal color code. You can use the name of the color too. You can just write red, blue, yellow, whatever, black. Now the hexadecimal code for black is 0 throughout, or the hash, and you use the 0 throughout. When you want white, you can use, I think, hash and then F throughout. You know, you can represent the hexadecimal color with 3 color code or the 6 color code. As I said earlier, the hexadecimal color code is in the format of RR, GG, and then what, BB. So like you can represent it in 3 forms, right? So like instead of RR, we can get R for the red, right? GG, green, or 1G for it, BB, B, or 1B for it. So instead of, let's say, specifying 6 Fs for white, we can use 3 Fs, and I mean, we're gonna get same color, white, right? Yeah, so that is it. We can use the hexadecimal color code too for our border colors, and we can use the RGBA, of which alpha forms part of it, or the opacity, how opaque we want the color to be, right? Yeah. So the border size too, I mean, we can specify it, right? The border size, border top, border left, the border bottom, and then the border right, right? That is how it moves in a clockwise direction. Yeah. So how you want it to be, sometimes you just need the border at the left side of the element. You can't just specify that. It's the border left, and then you specify there this one, the thickness, that is the width, border width for it. You specify the color, and then the style you want it to be, right? Now the border shorthand, I mean border property as a whole, we can use it and then specify all its sub properties to it above. So like, let's say when you take border like this, we can specify the border width in the border property, we can specify the border style, and then we can specify the border color too. So like when we do, let's say, border as in the property, we can do something like border colon 5 pixels solid and then red, and we end it as well. All what we mean is we want a border of 5 pixels or a solid border of 5 pixels with a color of red, right? And then that is a shorthand for it, for going through all those tedious processes to specify the border style, border color, and then the border width, right? Yeah, so that is it. Now let's talk about margin and then padding. Okay, so margin simply means adding space around your element. So let's say I have a div elements in my HTML page, and then while styling it, I want a space, I mean a transparent space, or a space with nothing around it. I can specify that with the margin property, right? So the margin property is in the syntax of the margin top, the left, or is it the right or the left? The right, the bottom, and then the left, right? Yeah, but sometimes we generalize it. We write margin, and then let's say we put in 5 pixels. That is a specific measurement for it. We want 5 pixels of space around our elements, right? Yeah, so like 5 pixels all around the top, the side, and then the bottom as well, all around. When you specify 2, it implies the top and the bottom for the first digits or the first measurement, and then the second value 2 for the side by side, that is the left and then the right side of the particular element. Now padding sometimes confuses us with the margin. Padding adds space within or from within the element. So here, let's say our div element, we specify a padding of 5 pixels too. We have the padding of the margin of 5 pixels already. The margin adds the space, right? So let's say right after the div element, we have another div element too, right? The margin will separate that particular div element from our previous div element with a space of 5 pixels, right? But padding adds the space from within, right? So let's say within the div elements, we have let's say a paragraph, or a p tag in it, a paragraph with some text in it, and then we add a padding to the div tag or the div element in our CSS file. We add the space from within, or the space comes around the p tag, right? Yeah, so the space comes around the p tag, not the div as a whole. I don't know whether I'm making sense or something. Yeah, so like that is it. Padding adds space from within, and then margin adds space around the elements as well. So yeah, padding also goes with the same syntax as margin, with the 4 sides of it. We have the top, the right, the bottom, and then the left. You can specify each of them, or you can generalize it with any amount of digits that we want. 0, sometimes you can do 0, 3, 0, 0. That is 0 for the top, 0 padding for the top, 3 padding for the side or the right, 0 padding for the bottom, and then the 0 padding of it. We can specify anyhow you want. However, if you want to generalize it, we just put in one digit or two digits to, you know, put in the values for the side by side or the top and then the bottom. Yeah, so I think that is it. These are some properties